Hello, I'm Kyla Maki, creator of the Reclaim Your Life transformational program and kylamaki.com. And welcome to my vlog, a place where every week I cover topics intended to help women with inflammatory bowel disease move past the stress of their illness and reclaim their life so they can feel more joy, fulfillment, and purpose, all while strengthening their bodies and feeling healthier. So in this week's video, I have part one of my interview with Annabel Fisher. I am so excited to introduce you to Annabel. She is my EFT coach, my mentor, and good friend, and just a real light in my life. Annabel is a no-fluff, intuitive breakthrough coach, self-care crusader, and authentic speaker. She helps soul-driven change makers and light workers conquer overwhelm, comparisons, perfectionism, and exhaustion so they can force less and flow more and make their one precious life count every day. She is the author of The Healing Game, Transforming Chronic Illness Using EFT, and has worked with thousands of chronically ill clients from around the world since 2004. In August 2015, Annabel was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She wasn't expected to live, and her oncologist and surgeon have called her a miracle. Thriving through a diagnosis of recurrent cancer, Annabel has become skilled at surrendering to the unknown, living in the present, and mastering the art of doing nothing. She offers Brave, a group program empowering women to listen to and follow their soul's calling while nurturing themselves and making their one life count every single day. So here it is, part one of my interview with Annabel Fisher. Well, Annabel, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to let me interview you. When I wanted to do interviews, you were the first one on my list, so I'm so happy to be doing this right now.
Thank you, Kyla. That's wonderful. Well, I'm delighted to be here, my love, and very happy to share whatever you'd like me to share.
Excellent. So, Annabel, you are an intuitive, no-fluff breakthrough coach. Can you give us a little background on how you got into coaching and into EFT?
Yes. So I found emotional freedom techniques in 2003 when I was very seriously ill with chronic fatigue syndrome. So a friend came to visit me and said, "I think I have the answer." And so, of course, I felt like at that point I'd heard it all and tried it all. And I was like, well, sort of to appease him, but also a little curious, I said, okay, tell me what this EFT is. And so he described a little bit about how it would work and how it would help. And he asked how I felt in that moment. And I said I was very angry and I was also very frightened. So I was angry because I got sick and there didn't seem to be any cure. And then I was also very frightened because the research I'd done at that point, and of course in those days, Kyla, we're talking about pre-Facebook, pre-social media, back the old days. So I went onto some forums and my dad did some research, and it seemed like no one recovered. It seemed like this was something that would be within the body forever, and it was more about managing the symptoms and never being in vibrant health again. So we decided that we would address that particular fear. That was the strongest thing I was feeling, more than the anger. And so my friend started to tap on me on the meridian points. And it seemed as though somebody had gone into my head and sort of scrambled around in my brain, because after he did some tapping for just a few minutes, I couldn't actually access that fear. It was as though he'd literally taken it out of my head. And of course I was blown away. And of course I was totally skeptical and thought there was something going on and this can't be true. This can't be right. But we persisted, and he wanted some people to tap with. He was recently trained, and I wanted some help. So the rest, I guess, is, as they say, is history, because we persistently worked together. And it wasn't long, actually, Kyla. It was probably like a couple of months. Within that time, a lot of the debilitating symptoms that I had already started to either diminish or had gone completely. So things like noise, light sensitivity, insomnia, I had a lot of food allergies, joint pain, all those sorts of symptoms had gone. And then I was left with fatigue, but it was seriously diminished. I was also in a wheelchair at that point, and it didn't take long before I was up and walking around. So, of course, I was enamored by EFT and I wanted to train myself. So when I was well enough, I went to train as a practitioner. My dad drove me, and in the lunch times, he would come and pick me up, and I'd go home, have a sleep, and then he'd take me back again. So I was dedicated, but I wasn't completely healed at that point. But then I started working with clients, and I guess the rest is history. That became my profession, and I specialized in working with chronic illnesses, probably for about 14 years. And not just with chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, but all sorts of autoimmune diseases as well. And as you know, because of your knowledge of EFT and your expertise, it doesn't really matter what the tip of the iceberg is presenting to us, so what the illness is, so long as we can get to the roots and identify the emotional drivers behind that, that's where we're going to have success. And where we have the emotional freedom, then the body can relax and feel safe enough to be at ease and heal, be given that space and freedom to heal. So that is my EFT, very short version of my EFT history. And then I know that you'll probably be asking me about my more recent health concerns, but more recently, I've started integrating not only EFT with my clients, but things like breath work and meditation and visualizations. And I've always been a student of NLP. I trained in NLP quite a long time ago, probably about 10 years or so ago now. So I'm fascinated by mindset and how the mind is so powerful and holds us back or allows us to sort of plunge forward and do whatever our heart and soul desires. So when I call myself a breakthrough coach, that's what I see in my clients. Those miracles that occur. Now that could be in 1 minute, or it could be over a series of sessions, but breakthroughs are what create the life changes.
Excellent. So for those that are watching that don't know what EFT is, can you just go in a little bit and explain what emotional freedom technique is?
Yes, of course. So I'm sure many people watching are familiar with acupuncture. So we have acupuncture points, acupressure points all over our body, from the top of our head down to the soles of our feet. And it may be well known that by stimulating those points, as in with acupuncture, we can release certain blockages. And so EFT is based in part on that. So rather than using needles, we use the tips of our fingers, and we are stimulating those points by literally, as the name suggests, tapping. So tapping on these points. And the beautiful thing about EFT is, unlike acupuncture, where of course there are many, many hundreds of acupressure points, with EFT there's probably about 10 or 12. So it's very easy to remember the points and gently tap on them. But where the sort of the mindset piece comes into that is, as we're tapping, we're acknowledging what the problem is. So whether that's down to physical pain with a headache or a lower back pain, or whether that's something going on in a relationship or a work challenge, we can address that with EFT. I guess the skill comes into being able to identify what the root causes are to get the permanent results. But that now EFT, I mean, it was founded in the mid-90s by Gary Craig, and now I know it's way more common. Like when I first trained in it, Kyla, I mean, most people didn't know what it was, whereas many people now do know what it is, or they've heard of it, or it's more commonly known as tapping now. And I think the idea of being able to allow that emotional freedom in such a short period of time makes it very accessible for so many people. So yeah, I mean, from children to animals to adults, it works. So long, like I say though, so long as we're able to identify what the core problem is. And so sometimes that's very easy. Like, of course, I've got a headache because I've had a stressful day. So that's pretty clear. So we would acknowledge it's been a very stressful day. Perhaps the office was stuffy and hot, or there were more demands piled on us than usual. So things like that might be quite clear to identify. But then things such as chronic illnesses, that takes a little bit more unpacking. So we need to identify, for example, okay, when did the person start feeling those symptoms? Because often, in my experience, the symptoms start before we're actually diagnosed. So many clients of mine over the years have said, well, I've had these symptoms 20 years, I was diagnosed 16 years ago, that sort of thing. So it's finding out when did they start, and then of course what was going on in our life at that time. And I'm not saying always, but usually it's not difficult to target quite an anxiety-provoking period of time. Many clients I've worked with perhaps have gone through relationship breakups, or a move to a different place or a different country even, or challenges at work, or being targeted at work and perhaps bullied. Many people identify challenges at school and things like that. So we can go back to stressful occurrences in someone's life and work through those painful times. And that's usually when we start noticing differences in our current physical symptoms.
Yeah, I know, like, when it comes to chronic illness, there's so many components. And the first and foremost that people think about are, like, diet or supplements or their medications or exercise. But the often overlooked is the emotional and mental health. So we've sort of touched on the importance of that, but do you think there's a lot of people that sometimes often don't make that connection, that, oh, maybe it's not just what I'm eating or what's going on, it's actually what's emotionally or mentally going on?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you've mentioned that. I mean, if I think of myself back in 2003, I had shifted gears, changed my lifestyle. I wasn't able to work. I was doing chair Tai Chi. I was being pushed in a wheelchair. I was taking so many supplements that I rattled. I had changed. My diet was, at that point, I was vegetarian. I had a clean diet, but I had to make further changes to it. And so the emotional component didn't really, it's not that I was unaware of that. Of course, I had an idea that our emotions create dis-ease in our lives of some kind. But I don't think I'd really unpacked that, hey, what's happened in my past and how I've responded to it. Most crucially, how I've responded to it could be impacting me now. Why is it that somebody could go through a terrible experience in their childhood and their sibling or close friend goes through a very similar experience, if not the same one, and yet they grow up and experience different responses to that time? I've worked with many people who, without question, have PTSD from something in their life, and yet one of their siblings is apparently untouched by it. So I think it's not just identifying sort of the stressors, but also how we responded to them at the time. Did we feel in a supportive environment? Because a lot of my work, I've noticed, Kyla, comes down to a very, very crucial point, which was I didn't feel supported at the time, whether I was 4 years old in the classroom or whether I was 44 years old in the office. So I think you're absolutely right that many people would think, well, I'm doing the nutritional work, I'm taking the supplements and perhaps having other therapies that are helping me, such as massage or acupuncture. Not not to discredit any of that. It's all fabulous and vital, but often the more emotional part of it is overlooked. And I think the success that my clients have had is bringing it all together. So I've never advocated, hey, with EFT, you don't need that or this or the other. But it's more about let's bring this into it and see if all of these things can benefit one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that for myself where it's like, I know we've talked about it's like the rain barrel. If you have so many things that are sort of happening, whether it's bad diet or, whatever else, then it starts to overflow and you're like, oh, wait a second, I'm not feeling well now.
Yes, that's right. Yes, because you've sort of gone back in reverse, because I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's only our mismanagement of our emotions that cause an illness or anything detrimental in our lives. Certainly, I'm not suggesting that. But you're absolutely right. It could be somebody's in a stressful experience. For example, a family member has died. So naturally, things like diet, sleep, nutrition, healthy exercise, those things can go out the window, especially when we're immersed in a very time-consuming, highly stressful event. And so you're absolutely right. The rain barrel fills and fills, and then there's nowhere else for the water to go, so it starts to overflow.
Excellent. So, Annabel, you've been through a lot in the last few years, to put it mildly. And I have such great admiration for your spirit and how you've handled your illness. In the journey you've been through in the last year, maybe sort of go into a little bit about that and how, EFT or the emotional healing and mindset has really helped you through. Because that's something that I have been so impressed with, is just how you've handled everything and your attitude about it all. So.
Yeah, thank you, Kyla. Well, I feel like you've been on this journey with me. You're one of my biggest cheerleaders and just a very important person in my life to help me see from a different perspective, because I'm grateful that you said those things, because sometimes when we're immersed in it, it might feel that we're not making any progress or it's just one hopeless thing. Perhaps if I share a little of my recent journey. So in 2015, the early part of 2015, I had just finished writing my book, The Healing Game, and it was about to be published. So there was a lot of high stress around that time, and upon reflection, I can see I didn't handle that as I may have done if my highest and best self were in play, put it that way. And of course it was hot, we were approaching summer, so I think the stress and the heat combined, I had lost my appetite, and I was feeling very tired, but I was soldiering on, and I knew I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and in June the book would be published, and hopefully my life would be restored and all that sort of thing. And then at the end of August of 2015, the pain in my belly that I had felt for pretty much most of that year had reached a point where I wanted it checked out. So I went to the doctors, and I wasn't happy with what I was told. I was told it was endometriosis, which I thought was highly unlikely. I had that some years ago, and I'd had some laser treatment, so I thought, I just know it's not that. My gut told me. So I asked my husband to take me to emergency at our local hospital, and what was suggested was I had a bladder infection, but again, I felt that was not the case. My gut told me, and I think this is crucial as well for people watching this, Kyla, that it's so important to be guided by anyone, whether that's medical or non-medical profession, but also to listen inside as well. We have our radar, our inner guidance system, and we know what's going on. Nobody knows us like our own bodies, because we're not a statistic and somebody to check off on a chart. We've grown into these bodies, we know. So I had a CT scan The next day I was called in, and then I was just waiting for the results. I had to go back into emergency for them because that's where I'd started the process. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and I could see there was a clock in the room I was in, and sort of 1:30 gradually got to 5:30.
Wow.
And I didn't really think anything of it. I just thought, oh, they're super busy. It's great. I'm going to get these results the same day. And then a very ashen-faced doctor came in with a nurse, and I could tell by the look on his face that it was not going to be a bladder infection. And he told me that he had studied the results and that I had stage 4 ovarian cancer, and it had spread into 10, what he could see. Well, at that point he said many of my organs. We learned it was 10 of my organs. And so it had metastasized. So at that point, I say that I feel as though I sort of ran into the brick wall. And I know, and it's easy to say in hindsight, please know I'm not saying to somebody who's watching this who is just finding out a diagnosis that this is exactly what they needed. Of course not. Nobody deserves that. But I know in hindsight, I had to run into that brick wall to make me stop, because I'm a former workaholic, and I'm type A, and I'm very, very driven and very motivated, which of course has many merits to it. But on the downside, I feel that it had driven me into a place where I no longer had any balance in my life. So, of course, with that sort of diagnosis, I was told that I didn't have much chance of living because it had spread so far, and the tumours were so big that I couldn't be operated on at that point. So, if I were to live long enough, I would need to have chemo at that point to shrink the tumours so that I could undergo surgery. And that's exactly what happened. And then 4 months later, I had an 11-hour surgery, followed by more chemo. So it was indeed a wake-up call to outnumber all wake-up calls, I would think, which it woke me up. I mean, as you know, my whole lifestyle is totally different now. My mantra is less force, more flow.
I love it.
Yes. I mean, I've gone from a hustler and a pusher and a striver and a forcer to someone who is present. And that's what was missing before. I was always in so much of a rush. Like the first thing I did as I literally jumped out of bed was go through my to-do list in my head, like what needs to be done, when, and then I'd rush in because I had a home-based business, so I rush into my home office and turn on the computer. So now it's a much slower pace of life, and because I'm not overwhelmed and overloaded, I'm able to be in that moment and really be present. So present with conversations, present to the beauty outside my office window when I see it, present when I'm watching something or reading something. And all of that, I may have been successful, as we may think of it in the West, with a booming business and a published book, but I was not, there was nothing internally. There was no joy or consistent happiness there. So I've really done that 180 we often read about. And I mean, I said to you just before you started the interview, I was just outside with my chickens outside the garden.
I love that you have chickens.
Yes, our chickens now, they were battery caged chickens, and now they're living off the land, as it were, producing us eggs every day. So things like that, to have the moment to be able to do that. I mean, before, a few years ago, having chickens would have been a nice idea, but I would have immediately thought, where will I find the time? I've got to work so much. So there's so much beauty, so many blessings in my life that I have created now since this diagnosis. And so yes, I am an entirely different person. I mean, the same spark within me. I still feel motivated to do different things now. I'm not suggesting I've changed and nobody would recognize me, because I think it's important that I recognize the woman who got me to that point and did so well until that point. But now my life is totally different.
Excellent. Well, you've certainly done. I've certainly admired you as you've gone through this, because as anyone who's gone through, a really big diagnosis or anything else, it's earth-shattering at times. It really does. It is a brick wall where everything just changes. So I have great admiration for you as you've gone through it all.
Thank you. Oh, Kyla, I just remembered. Sorry, I went off on my tangent about what I experienced. But you said, I think you asked something about my mindset.
Yeah.
Did you feel that it was EFT and my mindset that helped in some way?
I think you and I have talked about it. And I think there's some people, every diagnosis is different. Whether it's somebody, you have eye issues and you're losing your eyesight, or you have colitis, which is what I got, or, it's cancer. I know we've talked about cancer is a really big, scary diagnosis. So to have the mindset in that, to be, as you said, adjust your lifestyle, live your life, and not get bogged down by the diagnosis or the term of what you've been diagnosed with. Not saying that that's, the term's not important, but just, instead of being, I'm the person with cancer, you're just like, well, this is what's going on, and living your life. So just the mindset of that.
Oh, I mean, what you just said is crucial, isn't it? That, I know when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, it was very helpful to be given a label.
Yeah.
Because as many people watching this may be aware, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME as it's known in the UK and Europe, they're often unidentified and there's no cure. And and of course, I'm sure people have heard that often people suffering have been told, it's in your head. So to be able to find out, this is what's wrong with me, now I can do something about it. So I remember, and I'm not suggesting for one moment chronic fatigue syndrome is the same as being diagnosed with terminal cancer, but I was able to hook into that and think, okay, this is the box I've been put in. What can I do now? So I was able to research ways that I could improve my lifestyle and turn it around. And I think in a similar kind of way, this was the same, because, okay, that's the label I've been given. And yes, I have been put in a box as far as statistics go and how advanced it was and at that point and all the rest of it. But what am I going to do about it? I now know what it is, so perhaps I can do something. And then I could research. And of course, hundreds and hundreds of people on Facebook were giving me lots of ideas and, excuse me, very, very, very generous. I mean, people that really didn't know me at all were sending me supplement ideas and different specialists that they'd heard of. So yes, I think there's a benefit to having that. But then again, if we think of the flip side, part of that label is it's terminal.
Yeah.
And so part of my journey is living with what that means for me and not getting bogged down in the T word. I found out more recently that the cancer that I have is recurrent, which at the time I thought it was a standalone cancer that was healed through chemotherapy, the surgery, and all the alternative treatments that I had. But I was re-diagnosed in June of 2017. So again, it's been a more recent journey to transition into the R word, as I call it, the recurrent cancer.
Yeah.
And what does that do? And I mean, that can really mess with my head. There have been some pretty bleak days. But again, that mindset piece is so crucial, because I always feel like I have a choice. I could end up blubbering on the floor in a heap, and that's great too. If somebody needs to do that, rock it. Like, blubbering on the floor is wonderful, so long as it's not holding us back, and that's where we're staying. So I I'm constantly weighing up what choice do I have in this moment? Where do I want to be? Am I going to blubber on the floor in a heap, or am I going to step up and do something? And doing something, just to be clear, Kyla, I don't mean running around like I used to in a crazy whirlwind of doing. It's more do I need to sit in the garden right now? Do I need to really own this and sit and cry or punch a pillow? Or do I need to call a friend and cry with her? Or do I need to journal? Or what is it that I need to do right now? Maybe I need to do some research online and find out some more information. So for me, action is very important. And it doesn't have to be fighting cancer. I've never come from that place, but action of some kind can be have such a calming effect on us. Like I know that there's a part of me that goes, oh, good, I've done something. If it's sitting in the garden and meditating on it, or simply listening to the birds and looking at the blue sky, that's okay. That I am listening to what I need and I'm doing something about it, rather than feeling powerless and frightened and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. Okay, everyone, so that was part 1 of my interview with Annabel Fisher. Stay tuned next week for part 2, where we talk more about her book and some of the triggers that contribute to chronic illness. If you like this video, please like it. And as they say, sharing is caring. So please share with all your family, friends, or anyone else you think that might enjoy it. To never miss out on any exclusive content that I only share in email, please go to my website at kylamaki.com and sign up for my newsletter there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep on pursuing your desires, because true health comes from our passion, growth, love, and joy. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.